All right, hey folks. I wanted to talk a little bit more about my experiences in China, kind of based on the last discussion I had about Sounds of Freedom, where I talked a little bit about the story of Ye, and why I think that had such an impact on me, because there's a context for that, and the context is within my experiences of China, and I never really had the opportunity to talk about some of the things that happened to me in the entirety of my 10 years in China. I was able to disclose some of that in the last 2 years of my time in China, and that ended quite abruptly, unfortunately, by the interventions of COVID. And but I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things, and a lot of this kind of comes up. A lot of this kind of arises from the fact that, like, I had reconnected with my family, like in the last 3 years of my time in China. I had chosen to reconnect with my family, and I did that because I knew that my parents were, nearing the ends of their lives, and I wanted to have good memories of these people. In my adult life, I found that I was accumulating a lot of bad memories that didn't correspond to my childhood. I felt like I had some very good memories of being raised with my parents. But when I became time for me to be an adult, and the possibilities of me kind of eclipsing their accomplishments, which would kind of put me in a dominant position in our family, that's when the problems started to rise. And I have very bad memories from that point on. Right, the extent that they've interfered in my ability to prosper was very problematic to me, and that was one of the big reasons for me going to China. I needed to get somewhere where my family had no influence. So let me begin talking a little bit about when I went to China. I went to China after leaving California, and California was very difficult for me. I was trying to find work within the field that I'd gone to college. I'd done really well in college. I had worked all my life at that point, and I'd worked very hard, but I was still just making, barely above minimum wage, and I didn't see a career sort of, I didn't have any connections. I didn't have any networks, right? Nothing had really been established. Even like 4 years in college, and people I'd worked very closely with just stopped talking, like whatever. They found their niche, they found their ability, and it was like they didn't want anything really to do more with whatever, whatever I brought to their lives. They felt they could do better. I don't know what it was, to be honest with you. So anyway, I was out in California, and I was trying to make something happen, and it just kind of felt like I didn't like the atmosphere. I just felt like, oh, here's more swindle. Here's more me helping people for free and not getting anything back for it. They're just kind of like compromising me and waiting for me to get in debt, really further in debt, or they're waiting to get me in a compromised position where it served their interests more than my own. And so that's when that's when I stumbled across this Asian material in the Korean centers, and I met this Chinese girl who proposed to me, like, hey, why don't you go to, I was writing a script about Transcontinental Railroad that I thought was kind of interesting and unique, and I knew there was nothing out there, and it was like my Titanic, I was thinking, oh, this could be like maybe a Titanic thing, and I saw kind of the Asian thing happening in China, and I said, like, this is interesting to explore, right? And so that's when I met this girl learning Korean, and she said, hey, you can go to China, and that's where that went. And then I started the process of, like, I said, okay, there's an opportunity for me. Like, here's my chance to, maybe find some prosperity, and I went through the difficult process of, qualifying, getting the qualifications for that. I passed all that stuff, went through all the course taking, and found an agent, found a recruiter, and found a position in China. And one of the things was, I knew I was going overseas. So I talked to my parents at that point. I mean, we were still in pretty close. No, it was kind of weird because they didn't like talk to me during when I was out in California. They didn't really contact me. One of the like great sort of one of the real sort of one of the sort of nasty things they did to me was that my grandmother passed away. My 80-year-old grandmother, my mother's mother, who I had a very close relationship. Me and my brother had very close relationships with our grandparents, and they adored them. My grandmother, my mother's side, those grandparents really kind of adored me. And that grandmother of mine passed away, and it was weird because I had a dream that she passed away. I had a dream before when she passed away. I had a dream of it, and when my mother finally told me like that's what happened, that she did pass away, they didn't think to bring me back home, right? Like I couldn't afford the plane, but they didn't make any offer, right? They didn't want me at that funeral, and I thought that was a really sort of really nasty thing to do. Like they didn't want me to participate in my grandmother's death, and that had a lot of implications. Like why wouldn't he be here if she meant, if they were that close, why wouldn't he be here, So they made no effort to bring me back, and they just said, that's no big deal. And it was a big deal, right? But anyway, I contacted my parents when the China thing looked like it was going to happen. I contacted my parents. They said, well, you can come here until you leave, and you can stay at our house. So I said, oh, that'll be a good thing because I plan to leave from New York. That's where most of my stuff is. I got to come back there, get all my stuff, and get ready to leave to China. And so I was staying with my parents over. It was kind of over Christmas and all that, that winter season, and they, I was telling them everything I was doing, and I was telling the whole process, and then I got a contract, and I was in contact with them, and we were trying to set up a date for me to arrive, right? And the Chinese people, first they set one date, and then they said, oh, we can't really do that. We need to switch it to after Spring Festival. First they had a date before Spring Festival. And in our discussion, they said, well, that's not gonna, they contacted me and they said, like, can you come after Spring Festival? Because the school will be closed for 2 weeks. There won't be anybody here. It makes no sense for you to come. And I said that, okay, fine. And it was still like within February is when I would be leaving. And when I told my parents that, they were like, well, you can't stay in the house during that month because we're going to Aruba. And I was like, that was very infuriating for me because it was like, it was only a matter of 3 weeks and there was nothing I could do, right? I didn't know what they expected of me how I was going to deal with that. Like I didn't have anybody's house I could stay at. And, they were just like, I don't know, they expected me to rent out a hotel or something for 3 weeks, and then leave, or, leave. I couldn't, I was like, that's like a very expensive bill. Why would you dump that on me now when I'm trying to go to China? I have this contract, I have, I scheduled my flight for then. What is your problem with letting me stay in the house for that 3 weeks, right? And then just leave. And they're like, no, we don't want anybody in the house, that just blew up to a big fight, right? And I was like, here they are ruining my chances here. I worked really hard for this, and This is a good opportunity for me, and I need some stability outside of this family, right? I need to establish myself outside of this family. That's what I'm trying to do in my life. I mean, that's your adult life. If you can't establish that, you're going to have a very hard time to succeed when your parents are gone. And it's like, for me, it was very clear that they were trying to maintain their dominant position in the family, and they've destroyed the family as far as I'm concerned. They've destroyed the relationships with my brother, they've destroyed the relationships with me, they've destroyed the relationships with their own siblings, and they've just demolished our entire family sort of cohesiveness. So they did that to me, right? They started a big fight, and I knew how these fights go. I knew my dad, and very often it gets violent. He takes a swing at me when he feels like he can't, when he feels like he can't sort of defend his position from a rational point of view, he turns to violence. And I knew that was going to happen, so we were yelling. I just said, I'm going to my room, right? And I went to my room. It's not really my room. It was their room, the room I was staying in their house. But I went there and I closed the door and I was just shouting at them, and they decided to call the police and have me removed from the house. Now here's the thing about that. It was winter, right? And there was a nor'easter going on that night, right? When we got in that fight, there was a very sort of severe storm happening. Like, there was like buckets of snow coming down, and there was like a foot of snow on the ground. But yet they decided to call the police, make the police come out to the house, and the police get there, and my parents are like making like, oh, he's violent and all so on. So I'm in my room. I'm not coming out of my room, and I'm explaining that to the officers. I said, hey, these people get violent. I went to the room to avoid that, right? And my parents were, no, it's him. You got to get him out of here, right? And this is all before I'm trying to get this job, like, that I've agreed to, that they know of. And this is, like, I'm trying to do the responsible right thing with my life, and these people are acting very irrationally because they want to go to Aruba, right? They want to be that selfish, and they don't want to have to, I guess, worry about their house or something like that. And it catches up to them. But so the police come, and I explain my story. They're explaining their side of the story. And the police are like, there's no way we're putting this kid out on the street tonight. Like, you don't seem to understand, like, how bad it is out there and how ridiculous you're being right now. Like, and the police are like putting them in their place. And my father did not like that, right? He didn't like the fact that here's an adult human being that you are trying to put out in a snowstorm where he would more likely freeze to death, right? More than likely freeze to death. But you don't care about him to that extent. And they forced him. Like, they said, there's no shelters open, there's no beds open tonight. Like, if you want him out of this house, like, you set him up in a hotel. And so they made my father take me to the Holiday Inn Express, and they made him pay for the week to house me there. He did not like that, right? He did not like them putting it up his ass, right, like that, over his own son. And if you watch the video, there's a video I did. That's from that Hotel Inn Express. I did a cover of Bruce Springsteen's My Best Was Never Good Enough. And that's on my channel here. If you want to watch that, that was from that period. So this is me going to China, right? And this is like, 1 month ahead of time. So I'm there for a week, and in that time, my parents they didn't want to pay for the hotel that whole time. Oh, geez, they didn't want to pay the expense. They wanted me to pay it, but they didn't want to pay it. They got to go to Aruba, And so they decided they're going to send me to my aunt. Now, I've had a similar sort of experience as my aunt. I had to stay at my aunt's once before, and that time that I stayed with her, I witnessed her like physically assault my 80-year-old grandmother, right? And that, when I saw her do that, I confronted her and I said, you get her fucking hands off of her. That made her call the police, right? That made my aunt call the police, and they threw me out that night, right? The police came and threw me out. They just called the police, and they said I was the violent one, even though I had watched my aunt insanely, absolutely insanely assault my 80-year-old grandmother, right? They threw me out that night. I did not like being around my aunt, but I had no choice. So I said, I'll go and stay with my aunt for these 2 weeks, these 2-3 weeks. I'll just lay low, I'll stay in that room, I'll go to the library all day. And that's exactly what I did. Like, I would go to the library, or I'd try and pick up day work somewhere here and there, and just to make some money, and then I would, and then I would leave in 3 weeks. And so that's exactly what I did. I just stayed in my room, went to the library, avoided these people as much as I possibly could. And then I left. And when I left, I just had a taxi come. I walked out of that house and say anything to anybody. I didn't want anything to do with these people anymore, right? I went to China. I said, this is my new start, right? I'm immigrating to America as far as I'm concerned. I'm out of here, this mess. And so I went to China, right? And, for that 6 years, up to the point that I reconnected with my parents, I thrived. Right? I was able to prosper for once in my life. I was able to focus on my work. I was able to establish my career in a way that was advantageous to me. Like I could go from a job to a job, and with the material and the experiences I had, I had created value for myself that I had been deprived of, right? They were keeping me from thriving, and I started to thrive, right? And that's where I got to the point where I'm like, this is this is my family, and I'm trying to do the right thing here, and I don't want I want to have good memories of these people, right? I don't want to feel this way, and that's, down the line. But anyway, back to the story of Yue. And like nobody knows about my experiences in China because they didn't even ask, right? Like even my parents, when I came back from China after COVID, nobody ever talks about what I did in China. They don't care, right? They don't care about my successes or my stories there or anything to do with, like, that to them is offensive to them because I was doing well. It's also offensive to them because they tried to frame me for stealing something, right? And this is where I'm talking about, like, it comes back to kick them in the butt, right? When I left to China and I wasn't speaking to them, they needed a way to sort of frame that, to make them look good. And from what I gather, it is my impression that they were telling people I had stolen something from them, right? They were telling people, here's what they told me. My mother was missing her wedding photos and some rings, right? And they didn't know who took them, right? But they let my brother and they let my niece stay in their house when they weren't there, right? And my brother and my niece had parties in their house when they were not there, right? But they tried to make it sound like that's why I went to China, because I had stolen from them, right? That's why I was in China not speaking to them, because I had stolen from them. When all the evidence, and it's absurd that they would let my brother stay in that house after going to the extent that they did, to ruin my ability to get to China, because they didn't want anybody staying in their house when they weren't there, right? They let my brother do it, they let my niece do it. They fucked up, right? My brother fucked up, my niece fucked up. They had parties in that house, and some of my mother's items ended up missing, and they tried to dump that on me because I wasn't there and I wasn't speaking because I wasn't speaking to them, right? That's what went on there, and that kicked them in the ass. They do not they don't ever apologize for any of that either, right? They'll protect my brother, they'll protect my niece to the ends of the earth. And to their deathbed. That's how that's gonna go. And so anyway, so I went to China, and this first year was crazy. Like I had my contract, and I had a contact there, a very Christian kid, a guy named Ken Owen, a really nice kid. And I was in contact with him before I went to China, and I met him when I got there because he just kind of moved on to another position. I believe he moved on to a job in Wuxi, and so I met him. He got me settled in. He was a nice kid. I really liked Ken. It was kind of always odd to me that he was like proselytizing in China, like he was doing courses on the Bible, and I thought that was I thought that was weird because China has very sort of strict laws against that kind of thing. But he moved on to Wuxi, and he met a girl, and he got married, and they had a baby and everything like that. I followed up with him later on. The weird thing about that with Kent was that after I left, I was in Fuzhou in Jiangxi province my first year, and I met him there, and within a month or two he had left. And I didn't see him for 2 years, but then I got a job in Wuxi a couple years later, and I ran into him. It was the weirdest thing. I was at a mall, just some random mall, out in Wuxi, and Wuxi's a really big city, right? It's a really big city, and I had no idea where he was in this entire city, and I walked into him in a mall. It was the weirdest thing, and we caught up and said hi and how you doing, and wished each other well, and that was that. But that was one of those weird sort of experiences where, it was a weird sort of experience. Anyway, my first year in China was just kind of crazy, and so I get there, and it's a completely new world to me. I did a lot of research on China before I went there, so I had a general idea in my head of what to expect. But once you're on the ground, it's much different. You're sort of actually integrating yourself. And so I get there, and I get a grasp of what I'm supposed to do, and I rise to the challenge, and I feel like I'm comfortable with it. I finish my first semester there, and then what happens is I have 3 months of summer break, all to myself. Right? It was kind of a sweet deal. If you're a college professor, I guess they all get that deal. And so I'm getting 3 months of paid salary, full salary, just to, hang out in this Fuzhou. And, I'm loving it. Like, this is my first chance to, really explore China. My first semester was just all, the amount of workload and the unfamiliarity I had with the position. It was all about sort of familiarizing myself and getting a grip on that. But the summer I had that time, at that point I felt like, yeah, okay, I know what I'm going to do next semester, kind of do the same thing. It worked, and so I can have a little more time to myself. So I bought myself a bike, and what I set my mind is like every day I'm going to do this loop around the city, I'm going to bike around this loop. And so that's what I did. And every time around the same time, 5, 6 o'clock, I would do this loop. And it was just like you could set your clock to it. I just did it every day. It was my routine. It gave me exercise. It gave me the chance to get around town every day and see things. And, every once in a while I would even stop in a store or something like that if I saw something or I needed to pick something up. And so I would do this loop every day. And all the locals at that point knew me, right? Because there's only 5 or 6, 4 or 5 actually, foreigners in this entire city, and it's hard not to miss us. And they know where we work. Even if you never had a conversation with me, you would know where I worked in that city, right? I used probably at the college. That's how it works. And but at the same point, I had been telling people about what I was hoping in China, or I talked a little more about myself to a lot of the people that I was working with, and the students, and so I'm sure there's information out there that was accessible about me, right? If somebody wanted some sort of to find out a little bit about me, there was a little bit of stuff out there to find out, and one of it I made no bones about. It's like I'm hoping I'm not married. My age, I'm not married, and I don't have kids, right? So, and I was saying I'm looking to start a family and have kids, and I hope to do that in China, right? That's really nothing. It's kind of a typical situation for most foreigners going to China, expats at that point, or any expats, passport bros they call them these days, which is kind of a very derogatory term for their own failings, but anyway. So I was over there looking for a family. I was hoping that would happen, hoping that would happen. But I wasn't being aggressive about hitting on girls. I wasn't going out to clubs or anything like that. That didn't interest me whatsoever. And so I'm doing this lap every day. And then one day I'm out there. It probably is about midsummer, or if not late summer. I see this little girl. I'm down in the city, the busy part of the city, and there's a lot of traffic there, and it moves pretty quickly, but it's a heavy traffic. And this time of hour is typical, people going home from work. It's kind of a busy hour. And I'm biking down the side of the road, and I see this little girl, and she's just crying, and she's terrified, and she's running in the middle of this traffic, and it looks like she's going to get hit. Nobody can see her. She's small, and a couple cars almost hit her, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in panic mode. I got to get this kid out of the road. They're going to kill her, right? So I get off my bike, and I run out in the street, and I'm holding back the traffic, and I get to her, and I get her hand, and I get her hand, and I just kind of walk her to the other side of the road. And she goes with me. She's frightened, right? She's terrified. She's very young. I would say maybe 5 years old or something, 6 years old, if that. And she's terrified, and she's just crying, and I don't know Chinese very well, right? My Chinese is just remedial. So I'm just kind of saying, it's okay, it's okay. And I'm trying to ask her, where's your mommy, where's your daddy? And she's just too terrified, and I can't imagine, I might be the first foreigner she ever seen in her life. So I'm like thinking she might be it's just too overwhelming for her to tell me anything. But fortunately, there's this Chinese guy walking by, maybe about middle-aged, and he knows English, right? And he comes up to me, and I explained to him what happened, and I'm like, can we find out where her parents are? Like, ask her where her parents are. And she's just too terrified. Like, she's not able to tell us very much. And she doesn't know. I think that's what I gathered from it. Like, she doesn't know where her parents are, and she's lost, basically. She's lost, and she's terrified by that, and that makes sense to me. Like, why, when I was a kid, and I remember getting lost in Kmart's, and running around crying. And I remember, like, Kmart's, and I remember, like, one of those store assistants, found me crying and took me up to the front desk, and they called for my mother, and my mother came and got me. So I'm thinking that's what's happened here, and my first instinct is like, well, we got to get her, her parents are probably looking for her. And that's all in good faith. I'm making these assumptions, like they might not be at that point, but like me and the guy decide we got to get the call. Like, I tell him, can you call the police, right? Can you please call the police and tell them to come and help this child find her parents? And he does that, and the police come, and they take my information down, they take the other guy's information down, and they take the girl away, and it was my understanding that they were going to find her parents and reunite them. And so, that's all in good faith, because I can't, because I don't know what's going to happen to that girl, right? I don't know I don't know 100% what I don't know like why she's lost in the middle of running around in the middle of the street. I don't really know why, and I don't really know what's going to happen to her. And so I'm doing it all in good faith, and I go back to my room, I bike back to my room, and then I have this time to sit on it, because I don't really have anybody to talk to about it. There's no other really foreigners at this on campus. I was just kind of there alone, and I'm just kind of thinking about it, and that's when it starts to kind of set in, and I just try and think of all the different things, possibilities, right, of what's going on, and what I know about China. And one of the things I know about China is that, like, they find it very hard to help others, right? And one of the reasons is because they feel like when you help somebody, you become accountable for that person, right? It lays on your conscience. It's like when you know something is wrong and you don't say anything about it. Well, here you've helped somebody, and if you don't take responsibility for it, it's going to rest on your conscience. And that starts to really kind of sink in on me. To the extent that I'm thinking, like, what an awful thing, like, there's some really bad considerations I have to, like, go through in my head. One of them was that, like, it was a setup. One of them goes through my head is like, that was a setup. They know I come by here every day, and maybe this parents, they were like, we have a daughter, we don't want a daughter, we want a son. What can we do with this daughter? Well, there's that foreign guy who comes by here every day. He doesn't have kids, so he's got extra resources, and they know I make good money at the university, so he could take care of our kid, And I think, like, adoption was a very sort of, adoption of Chinese children was a big thing then, right? And part of me was like, they're jumping on that. They're jumping on that opportunity. It's a possibility. I'm not saying they are doing it. I wasn't, like, so paranoid to that extent, but I'm saying they could be a setup, right? They could have said, like, he comes by this way, let's just drop our daughter here and see if he takes her, see if something sticks, right? That made me angry. That made me angry because, here I am, I'm a male, I'm not impotent, I can have children of my own, I've waited my whole life to do that. It was always contingent on my prosperity, right? Like, my ability to have kids was always tied into, like, well, you're going to have a stable career and things like that. And all my time in America, which I was just leaving, was people sabotaging that, right? Just people, like, making sure that I didn't have that, so I couldn't have that opportunity. And here the Chinese were, like, jumping on that opportunity out the gate, right? Like, we're going to just dump an adoptee on this kid, on this guy. and he can take care of one of our kids, right? You know, he doesn't have to have his own kids, and that spreads our genetic code and not his, and gets those resources for our kids. So, you know, yay for us. And that infuriated me, because I saw somebody like stealing away what I had suffered for, right? Like what I had sort of waited and suffered for, the prosperity and that choice, right? Of being able to say like this, I want to have a child with this woman, you know, and I'm capable of doing that. That infuriated me. On the other hand, on the good side of it, like one of the considerations I had was like, what about this poor child though? You know, like it was that side that says like, yeah, it is on your conscience though. You did step in, you did help this kid, and I don't want to see, she's a human being, and I don't, you know, like I have empathy for that. I have a great deal of empathy for this child. That would be a terrible thing, that if they had abandoned her and she had nowhere to go, right? And maybe they would, you know, I don't know if these police are gonna hand her off to an orphanage, or, you know, like what happens to abandoned children in China. It could be really horrible, right? So I start to consider like, well, maybe you should adopt her, you know, and this is kind of hitting me too, and you know, and I'm just going through all that process. If I chose to do that, like, or you're gonna have to like see that she gets fed every day. You're gonna have to get her up in the morning, get her in bed, make sure she's safe, make sure she's, you know, she's being looked after and taken care of and protected. You're gonna have to see that she gets, you know, you're gonna be buying her clothes, changing her clothes, washing her. You're gonna be doing all these things. You're gonna be taking responsibility for all that, and you're gonna have to name her. You're gonna probably have to take her to America, do all that paperwork, and you're gonna have to see her through to like she's established, she's an adult established in a community and can take care of herself to that extent, right? She has the support and the protections of her own, right? You're gonna have to see her through all that. And I was a little bit excited by that, to be honest with you, because I was going into my 40s at that point, and it was something I very much wanted. And so those thoughts were right there also, like I can do this, you know, like I can do this. But it was hard for me to reconcile. I did not feel it was fair that somebody would take my choice away, right? You know, like to me it was like, this is not how I wanted it, you know, like this is not how it should be. And on top of that, it was like, I don't even really know where to find her at this point, right? I would have to go to the police station because I didn't really know what police station even these police came from. I didn't take their information at that point. And I would have to find the police station, and they might direct me to another police station, and tracking her down. Don't get me wrong, it could have been done, but I chose not to do it. And I said, I'm just going to go on the good faith that she's reunited with her parents, and that was typically what would happen in this situation, right? I went in good faith at that. Like typically in good people, you know, and I'm gonna make the assumption these are good people. You know, I don't have any reason to doubt these police officers. I don't have any reason to doubt that man who stepped in and spoke. Was speaking to the little girl, and I have my good faith was that like this child is back with her parents. That's my best hope, and I left it at that. Then, and this is kind of another thing that happens in China, that's when the story of Yue kind of popped up, and that's kind of why it hit me so hard, because it was the story of a little girl who got run over in traffic. And it sort of reflected on that whole sort of like, you know, the great sort of tragedy of that story was that nobody did anything, you know, and I could say I did something, and I would continue to do things while I was in China. There's 3 other instances. There was an old man, I remember, I think it was Wuxi. He collapsed in the street. It was kind of a busy street also. He collapsed like on the side of the road, not on the sidewalk, but on the side of the road where traffic was passing, and I didn't see him go down, but I saw somebody point him out, and I kind of ran over there, made sure he was breathing, tried to put his body in a position that assisted that, and then I took a role in blocking traffic and making sure traffic was going around while somebody else called an ambulance. And then there was an accident. Actually, there was 2 accidents that involved bikes, where somebody was lying in the road, and I jumped out in front of traffic and made sure that traffic wasn't going to hit these people. Other people called the police to help them, and ambulances. So that's kind of why I mentioned that story. And it's just kind of like some of my experiences that I've never really had the opportunity to tell people about. I don't really want to. I don't tell them to. I don't want to tell them to take any sort of vainglory out of it, but it's just my experiences there. It's things that happened to me, and it's just a shame that I have no one to tell them to, and it's almost like people don't want to hear them. Like that people don't want, especially coming back to America after COVID, after reconnecting with my parents, right? And I see the same thing happening again. Like back here in the States, trying to get something set up, my parents do pull some shit again, and they're trying to derail me again, right? It's just all about them being that dominant sort of. They get to control, control the narrative, and they're ruining it. But the things with Melanie Mack, that's just more bullshit. Like my parents bullshitted, tried to say I was a crook. It's the stalking thing is utter bullshit. It's just utter bullshit. And them like her are people who are just they're not repentant about any of that. They know it's bullshit, and they don't want to. They're just unrepentant about it. And it doesn't matter if you fear reprisal, right? That's not, you can't ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't come with the fear of reprisal, right? Otherwise, you're not asking for forgiveness. You're just sort of interested in your self-preservation, and that's all I get from these people. It's like they're just interested in their own self-preservation. I don't really feel like it's just appalling to say you're a Christian under that pretext. But anyway, that's that story, and I just kind of wanted to broaden the context of my comments there at the end of the Sound of Freedom